Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this package. Before we do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that already, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, and you can also check out my new channel called Flying and Eating, which is about adventures around the world. I've got a whole bunch of videos on Japan. I think you guys are going to get a kick out of it. It's awesome. Anyway, I appreciate the support, so thank you so much. Now, yes, we got this package from a company called PhotoFast. They reached out to me, so full disclosure, they sent this to me for free for the purposes of review. They shipped it via Amazon, and it got here in like a day. So I'll put a link in the description. If you're interested, you can pick it up. So let's go ahead and open it up and take a look. Which, easier said than done, I thought. I thought this would work. All right, there we go. So inside, yes, here it is. The PhotoFast 4K Gamer Pro. Which enhances 1080p to 4K resolution. We're going to talk all about this. So here's the basic deal. If you're totally new to this and you have no idea what you're looking at, this is a device similar to the mClassic. That's the most obvious thing to compare it to. This device's purpose is essentially to take, just like the mClassic's was, is to take HDMI content, be it your video game console, your Blu-ray player, whatever it is, take that signal and do post-processing on it to upscale the resolution to hit certain benchmarks, whether it be 1080p, 1440p, 4K, etc. But then to also enhance upon that, because just stretching an image doesn't do anything in of itself. If anything, it could potentially make it worse. So they have to compensate for that by doing color correction, anti-aliasing, image sharpening, that sort of stuff. Both devices, their sole purpose is to just make your video games or your TV shows or movies or whatever look better by plugging this in. Core idea, that's what it is. If you're a veteran of this channel, you've probably heard of the mClassic. I drink the Kool-Aid on this thing. I think it's fantastic, which is why I'm really excited about this, because this has different features. These are not made by the same company. They're completely different in that regard, and so I'm very curious to see how this one actually performs. Now, without even using it, because obviously I haven't, as you guys just saw me open it, I can tell you certain things about it, especially when compared to this. The mClassic was kind of designed, hence the name and the list of consoles that are natively supported on the back, and then some asterisks to indicate they do technically work if you have extra things, whatever. The point of this thing was to take lower resolution content, whether it's 480p, 576p, 720p, or 1080p, and output, depending on how you have it set up, with what kind of compatible monitor, etc. 1080p enhanced, 1440p, or 4K. This one really only makes mention of the fact that it supports 1080p and just always gives you 4K. Makes sense. It's been a few years since the mClassic. It's logical there would be improvements. Even again, they're not by the same company. So I'm very curious to see how it actually performs, because yeah, it's just interesting to see like what resolutions it might actually support. I imagine, even though they only mention 1080p support, that it must support lower resolutions, because that would be a significant oversight. I also understand that yes, they work together. If you want to do that, it's recommended to put the mClassic first in that chain, and then the 4K Gamer Pro second, because it would then be taking the signal it receives from this and outputting 4K. So the mClassic, as I said, it could support a whole host of different resolutions because it was designed for various lower resolution content. So with gaming, it traditionally would give you 1080p, or if you had a compatible monitor, 1440p for all game content. It did technically support 4K, but it was exclusively for things like Blu-ray players or video streaming, DVDs, etc. It would give you 4K. This claims 4K on all content, which is cool. It also refers to itself as a performance booster, which is not really, I mean, it might be at best technically accurate, in only very unique circumstances. So it's worth mentioning that this thing, right on the box, really says it's designed for the Nintendo Switch. It literally says it's designed for the Nintendo Switch. Whereas the mClassic just kind of markets a whole bunch of consoles, though admittedly Nintendo Switch is the first one on the back of the box. Because both of them do an incredible job with the Switch. I mean, well, I know the mClassic does firsthand. But the problem with the Switch is obviously that it's antiquated technology. It's fun, we all like it, but it's old. Hence everybody's complaining about, hey, I want to Switch 4K, etc. These kind of help you get there, but only in a limited technical sense. Like, you will get a higher resolution, your picture will look better, but it can't do anything else. It doesn't really make the console like perform better or have better storage or any of that sort of stuff doesn't change. There's only one technical situation in which that can occur where the performance actually is better, and my guess is that's what they're referring to, so that they can call it a performance enhancer or a performance booster. So the Nintendo Switch obviously has native 1080p output on the system settings. However, here's the thing. Most games don't actually support 1080p. Every single game on that system supports 720p because that's what the handheld mode operates in. But developers were given the choice, like, hey, if you have it connected to the dock, there's a little more power there. You could potentially use it for better resolutions. And that's true. But most developers either don't take advantage of it, or if they do, they can only do it in some games. There's some games, of course, there are a bunch of games that support 1080p natively, but I would argue most don't. And then there's some that are like, well, we can't hit 1080p native even with the extra power from the dock, but we can get to like 900p. And then what the Switch itself does at that point is it just upscales and hits that arbitrary, not arbitrary because it's an industry standard, but hits the dimensions of 1080p to kind of keep, you know, everything standardized, which is basically just hitting a benchmark so they can technically say it's 1080p when it technically is, but doesn't really offer the benefits that go with it. My point is, you're essentially having the Switch dock do extra work and having the Switch itself do extra work that maybe the games weren't optimized to run in. Thus, you could actually have scenarios where games running in 720p on the Switch perform correctly, but if you set it to the 1080p mode on the Switch, it can have additional bugs or slowdown that was not really meant to be there. Now, that is a very small problem. That does not happen in pretty much most cases. This would exploit the handful of cases where it does, because what you would do is set the Switch to 720p. The mClassic, for example, recommends straight up that you run the Switch at 720p, then let it do the visual enhancement process. Let it do the upscaling, because then all your games are guaranteed to run exactly the way the developer meant for them to run, no slowdown, essentially. And then it does the resolution enhancement. It hits that 1080p benchmark, or it hits that 1440p benchmark, depending on what you have it configured as. This presumably does exactly the same thing. It's just that the benchmark is higher, hitting a 4K resolution. Make sense? So that's kind of the core premise here. But let's go. I mean, you know, it's hard to compare everything else about the mClassic to this without actually taking a look at it. But let's at least kind of try. Let's get through this box. I got it. It was glued. Yeah. All right. Well, inside, let's do the little unboxing here. So we got just inside just a few things, very similar packaging to. There's also some instructions here, which I don't think we're really going to need. Yeah, there's glue in there holding that together. Yeah, the 4K Gamer Pro by PhotoFast. Yes, it has a bunch of basic information about it. Comes with a little plastic thing. And then inside, you really only get 3 things. The first thing you get here is a USB-C cable. This is going to be required for power. This makes sense that it's using USB-C, as that's more modern tech, whereas the mClassic used USB micro. So that's a nice improvement. I prefer USB-C. It also came with a little HDMI extender. The mClassic also came with one of these. And do you know why? Because both of them can't physically fit in the Nintendo Switch, even though, well, this one straight up says it was for the Switch. This one just kind of says, like, yeah, the Switch really is our first recommendation. But neither one will physically fit in the dock, so they had to include this in order to make it, you know, capable of working. So this is just a micro extension cord for that purpose. And then, of course, you have the device itself, which compared to the mClassic, it's like twice the size almost. It's much bigger, which is fine. Then it basically just, you know, says like source. So that's what you would plug this into the back of, say, the console or whatever. And then on the other side, it has the HDMI output power and power. Again, just like the mClassic does. Now, like the mClassic, it also has 3 modes of operation. However, they function differently. The mClassic had this like little physical switch on the side, which limited it to just 3 options. And the way they used this was, the first option was to turn the device off, which the PhotoFast 4K Gamer Pro also has the same option. It just turns it off. Now, that can be useful in some scenarios, but for the most part, You know, like you could just disconnect the thing. I guess you could argue that case. The one I know that what the mClassic actually still is doing something even when it's off. It's doing a feature that's called HDMI repeating, which is funny because I only discovered that through bug testing. It's not mentioned anywhere. But HDMI repeating is basically the notion of like, if you have a bunch of HDMI compliant devices that are all feeding into, say, like an HDMI switch box, and then you have that switch box feeding into another thing, and then it meets the TV, that might be a little too much for an HDMI signal to handle. Hence, if you actually try to run something through that, you'll occasionally see like frame drops on your TV where it just goes to black for a second. It's because the connection isn't good. Because the HDMI signals aren't that strong. If you were like, say, a Hot Wheels kid, and you used to play with like the little tracks and you'd build them all and you'd like throw the car, it would never make it all the way around the track unless you had one of those little motorized things where once it got to a certain point, it just hit this thing and it like started speeding onwards again, and that gave it the energy to continue. HDMI repeating. Same concept, but for HDMI signals. Basically, if you had that whole labyrinthy matrix of things going on, and this is just kind of in the middle of that somewhere, even when it's off, it will just boost the signal and get it to your TV in a stable fashion. This doesn't claim to do that, but then again, neither did this. So it probably does it, but I don't know, and it's kind of a hard thing to test because your system actually has to be failing to even notice if it's fixing it or not. But anyway, so they both have that off mode. Then they have their first level of processing. This is very different. Again, the mClassic was designed around retro content, so it has a full processing mode with 4:3 aspect ratios. This is perfect for, say, the Dreamcast or the GameCube or the original Xbox, etc., where they only really, I mean, the original Xbox in some cases did, you know, widescreen content, but essentially most of their games run by 4:3. If you were to do the full processing mode on those, it would stretch the aspect ratio, which would be stupid because the whole point is to make it look good instead of ruining it. So they put the retro mode in there to keep the original aspect ratio, which made perfect sense. This does not have that. Instead, what it has is a first layer of processing. One of the big complaints with the mClassic was that people didn't necessarily like having everything processed. The mClassic does a lot of things all at once, but while some people liked the resolution enhancement or the color correction, they didn't necessarily like the anti-aliasing when they were putting it into, say, a Sega Genesis, describing it as like, you know, Vaseline on the lens. You know, like they didn't like the buffed out look, but they liked the other perks. So this, I assume they kind of saw that feedback online and said, okay, we don't need the retro mode because we're focusing on the Switch. So instead we'll have one layer of upscaling and one layer of enhancement for people who think that the full processing mode is too much. That mostly boils down to personal preference. I will obviously take a look at it and see what I think. And then they have a third processing mode. In the mClassic's case, full processing. You get all the features and it's in widescreen. This is the full 4K processing. Same idea. So yeah, there's really all I can say about it without actually using it. On the back they show some, screenshot samples. It looks like from Skyrim specifically. It mentions a couple devices that they claim to support. Supports various gaming consoles, portable device, TV box, and more. Examples: Switch, PS4, Wii U, Apple TV, Chromecast. Some odd choices, but okay. But yeah, it shows the TV, shows how to connect it. Switch game consoles such as Switch OLED, Nintendo Switch, PS4, Wii U, many more. I'm just surprised to see the Wii U like have a photograph on this thing. I just wasn't expecting that. But yeah, it's just really basic instructions on how it works. Oh, hey, I apologize. There's actually a fourth mode. You press it once for 4K plus low enhancement, twice for 4K plus medium enhancement, 3 times for full enhancement, and the 4th time to turn it off. So this has 4 modes, this has 3. I apologize. Because I was about to say, like, on the mClassic, I understood that limitation. It's a physical, like, toggle. You can only go so many. But this, it's one button. You could cycle as many times as you want. It makes me wonder, like, why they didn't add some additional features, like maybe all those things in a retro mode. But if it doesn't support lower resolutions, then I guess that kind of makes sense. So we will see. Okay, guys, so I've been using this thing for a while now, and it's time for final thoughts. I'm really between a rock and a hard place on this. So the short review here is, it is great. I really like it. It will become a permanent fixture in my setup. It is not snake oil. It truly does take 1080p, gives you 4K, and enhances upon it. It is nice. Longer explanation, it's got a lot of flaws that I think people need to know. And I say this as just like kind of a warning. It is good, but you need to understand this is a complementary device, much like the mClassic is a complementary device. It will enhance your setup. It doesn't make your setup. So let's start with the most obvious. You guys remember before I was talking about, I wonder if it supports lower resolutions like 720p, etc. Like the mClassic supports a whole bunch of lower ones. So the way I tested that is I took this. This is the Sega Genesis Mini 2. I did a video on this not too long ago. This has native HDMI output. There's no other signal on this. I mean, you can plug this straight in. It should work, right? Actually, kind of hilariously, because this thing's kind of bulky, it actually blocks the power supply. That is actually a hardware complaint I have with this thing. The bulkiness of it makes it not fit in a lot of stuff, but they were obviously aware of that, hence this cable. And trust me, with a lot of devices, you're going to need this. But that said, that's a small issue. When it's connected, what it should do, hypothetically, is take the 720p signal and give you 4K. But it doesn't. The thing is, 720p is the nearest neighbor to a bunch of lower resolutions, hence the Genesis Mini decided to use it, because obviously the Genesis didn't run anywhere near that. But it's still the lowest resolution that is a high-def resolution. But it's also the closest thing to 1080p that's just like right under it. That's kind of a standard industry, resolution. So I figured if anything was going to work that wasn't mentioned, it would be 720p. No. If you put 720p content through it, which that's the only way this thing does function, you just get 720p. It just does a pass-through. So that's okay. That actually means it really cuts off a lot of stuff from actually natively functioning with this device. Which we'll get back to in a second. But yeah, that's unfortunate. So I decided to test it with some other resolutions. I tried to test it with 1440p. That is a little difficult because there's not too many things that natively will output 1440p, and all of them that do typically won't even give you that option unless it detects a monitor that's capable of supporting it. So like the mClassic, for example, will natively output 1440p when it thinks that's what the monitor is or the next device up is capable of supporting. The Xbox Series X will do exactly the same thing. If it's connected and it says, hey, this monitor supports 1440p, it'll list it amongst the options. Neither of them would do it, which doesn't necessarily eliminate that possibility that this does support 1440p input, but it also probably means that it doesn't, because this thing was probably more or less saying, like, I don't, so don't even try. Again, I can't verify that one. That one doesn't get the little check mark, but like that's what it seems like. So another thing I decided to test with the Xbox Series X is that has a feature. It obviously can run in 4K, but you can set it down to 1080p, which if you then did that with this, it would output 4K, right? That's the whole point. But you can actually set the Series X to run at 120 frames per second instead of just 60 when it's running in 1080p mode. So faster frame rate, lower resolution. So the idea with this would be, oh cool, mix it with this and you get the 4K resolution and 120 frames per second. Sounds pretty good, right? I did not expect that to work, and it didn't. When basically this device only supports like 60 FPS input and like 30 FPS input, it doesn't support higher frame rate inputs. It just kind of says, never mind, can't do that. So it just kind of bypasses and goes to whatever it's detecting. I wanted to do some additional tests on the Xbox Series X, and I ran into an interesting one. When plugged in directly, and I tried to run in a Blu-ray with it, it didn't function. It actually triggers the HDCP protocol, which is basically a security measure to prevent you from trying to steal Blu-ray content. That's what it thinks you're trying to do when that device is connected. You can get around this with HDCP strippers and so on and so forth to make it work in your setup, but be aware this is a problem if you intend to do anything like watch movies or whatever with this connected. It may not allow that. These all sound like negatives because technically they are, but they are basically things you just kind of need to be aware of. It has a very specific niche that it functions in, which is basically 1080p 30 or 1080p 60 input. It will give you 4K output. That's all it says it can do. It's not lying to you, but it doesn't have magical hidden features underneath that I couldn't detect. So that brings me to the next point. Obviously, it was meant for the Switch. Now, if you remember, I told you the Switch, you're not really supposed to set it into 1080p mode because a lot of games don't actually support that, which means it's just upscaling kind of poorly. Now, if you actually do that, you're essentially feeding a poor upscaled signal to this first, which kind of muddies the signal before it can get to this. Thus, it can't do the cleanest of processing, but it will work. And I think that kind of needs to be understood. So in order to best exemplify that, I decided to use a game that actually will totally show that. There's a recent game by Ubisoft called Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope. Shout out to them because they gave me a copy of the game for free. Thank you. But that game is a perfect example of this. That game runs at some weird resolutions. In portable mode, it runs at 612p. Ever even heard of that one? And if you don't believe me, like, there's a benchmark website here. I'll show you right now. Screenshot. It says right there. That's the resolution it runs at in the portable mode. Now, when it's put in docked mode, it actually runs at 900p, which of course would be beyond 720p. But that's exactly what I said before, which is you should run the Nintendo Switch in 720p, because then you get the correct resolutions, supported resolutions, plus you're not drawing down the system by having it do things it really shouldn't be doing, or things that it potentially can weaken the signal or the strength of the game performance, etc. So that's not an option with this, because it has to be in 1080p mode, meaning if you run this game in there, the Switch has to do some level of upscaling before it reaches the device. Okay, with that understanding, we're going to show some footage here. Now I gotta be I'm sorry, I have to apologize about this. I have no way to capture 4K footage. There's really no exportable boxes that are, economically viable. I do not have a PC rig capable of doing this. Don't have an actual card one would install into your PC that is, first of all, capable of doing it, and my rig wouldn't support it anyway, so it really doesn't matter. So the way in which we had to capture this is that I'm running it on a 4K TV. I will use my Google Pixel 6 Pro, which is a very nice 4K camera on it. And then we will take the footage, render it in 4K, export in 4K, and you should be watching this on YouTube in 4K. But keep in mind, for obvious reasons, that's a large series of degradation, so diminishing returns. Anyway, so that's how we're going to do this. So the first thing up here you're looking at is a shot from the game right at the beginning of Princess Peach. And this game is made by Ubisoft, not Nintendo, so Nintendo can't give me a Content ID claim. Thank you, Ubisoft, for being cool. Now, so this is it running as basic as possible. It's just the Switch's 1080p mode, and this thing essentially off. Looks fine, looks like the Switch. So if we set this thing into its initial 4K mode, this is what you get. It is a very basic level of enhancement, but the resolution is now technically benchmarked at 4K. So we can then enhance upon that and go to level 2. So that's what this is. Now, I don't know how well this is actually going to be distinguished in the footage. On the television, it is noticeable, but again, I understand for obvious reasons why it may not be the most apparent thing. But then we also have level 3 mode. Level 3 mode, I'm going to be honest, this is how I would always run it. This is clearly its prime mode. This is really how it should be running. It actually looks really, really good, all things considered, all factors being equal, as it were. So it looks nice. So I get it when they say, like, hey, we designed this for the Switch and etc. It's good at that. But it's a very finite number of things that it would be compatible with, because most consoles you connect to it are going to run into the same problem where they don't really output 1080p, they upscale. Things like the 360. Famously, there's almost no 1080p compatible games on it. It's just upscaling. PS3, literally 0 games on that system run at 1080p. It always upscales. Every single game runs in 720p, so it's just the only thing that does is the dashboard, the XMB, runs in 1080p, and then the system just upscales. Things like the Wii U, of course, is a mixture. It does have some, and it has a lot that don't. Things like the PS5 and the Series X are kind of beyond that. PS4 and Xbox One kind of famously are all over the place as far as which resolution they're really running at. And then other modern devices or even older devices that are HDMI compliant, things again like these mini consoles are all running at 720p, or things like the retro USB NES, clone, which is actually very good, by the way. I did a video on it years ago. Only outputs 720p. So thus, none of them can natively function with this thing. That's where the mClassic kind of shines, because that's its wheelhouse. That's what it's trying to do. So what am I suggesting with all this? If you want this thing and you want to use it with something other than the Switch or stuff that maybe you don't even care about that. If you don't care about the fact that it has to do some measure of upscaling internally first and you're feeding it an inferior signal before it can do enhancement, that's fine. If you're happy with that, that's all you. But if you don't like that and you want to enhance it first or have the best signal out of it before it goes into this, you need a mediator device. Now that mediator device can be any number of things. You could use something like the RetroTink 5X, which is of course fantastic. You could use the mClassic. It doesn't really matter, but you will need something like that to be able to use legacy content on it. So for example, I took the Genesis Mini, I ran an mClassic into it, then I ran it with this thing, the 4K Gamer Pro, and then you run it on the TV, then you can see it is now running in 4K. Now that's ridiculous overkill for something like the Genesis. It wasn't really meant to run like that or even close to that, but that makes it work. That's how it has to be done. And by the way, connecting these two things together is not easy. The shape of them, they don't go well together. Hence those little these little cables I was talking about, the extenders. You will kind of need that in most situations. Like look how the switch was set up. It's just like it had to pop one out and then connect to the other one, then connect to the other. It's messy, but that's fine. It's not like they were meant to run together, but they do happen to work. So that would be my suggestion actually with the switch. Is you set the switch to 720p, you connect the mClassic, then you connect the 4K Gamer Pro to the mClassic and let it do the rest. And if you're curious what that looks like, boom, that's your result. That's Princess Peach running in that kind of setup. Now I realize that might be kind of hard to tell the difference, so let's run through the cycle again. This is that, then this is it off. This is back to the standard just, hey, it's 1080p mode, default switch, not doing anything. And then we have 4K mode 1, and then we have 4K mode 2, and then we have, you appreciate my stalling here, 4K level 3. So this is the maximum it would do on its own. And then back around to the mClassic plus this thing. And there is a significant difference there, again, on the TV. It might be harder to tell in the footage, I don't really know. But yeah, so part of me is saying you kind of have to trust my judgment on this, but I mean, I'm not the only person out there reviewing this and saying, like, this thing's pretty good, but I am telling you, it has a very specific niche that it's designed for, and if you want to use it with other stuff, you're going to need other additional complementary pieces. So, for me, this is a great device, because I have all that infrastructure. I'm betting a lot of you don't. And so you got to keep that in mind. I want to make sure that you're not buying this thinking it solves all your problems. This does not create the Switch 4K Pro Ultimate Edition. It's just a much better looking signal, but it can be better when the things are, well, actually it would be more like that, when they're going together, which ironically, well, it's not even ironic, this is funny. This almost looks like some sort of weird starship or something. Anyway, you put these together, that's great. This actually wouldn't even work. You'd have to separate these with a cable because this blocks the power supply on the mClassic. So yeah. So yeah, I do like it. I'll put a link in the description. Check it out if you want to get it. But just understand those caveats, those asterisks that go with it. Great device, needs extra pieces to get the most out of it. There you go. Thank you to PhotoFast for sending this to me. That was very nice of you to do. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys could do me a favor, please check out the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, etc. Please follow me on those things. Check out my new channel, Flying and Eating. And oh yeah, please drop a like, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't done that already. Thank you so much for the support, and I'll see you all later.